Alright, you lovely lot, welcome to episode 3 of NE1's mental health podcast, where we're discussing all things mental health and well-being with myself, Ray Elliott, and my pal and adopted Geordie, Sam Warner. Give us a bit of Geordie, Sam.
How are you, man? Didn't say that to me.
So we're going to be talking about or talking to people that have lived experience or maybe work in the mental health sector, which leads me on to our next guest, Mr. Ben Oliver from Worth Educating. Thanks for coming on, Ben. How are you doing?
Thanks for having us. Very happy to be here. I'm doing well, thank you. Nice to be with you both.
No, it's great to have you, mate. Could you let us know a little bit about yourself and about what it is you do and what you're looking to achieve?
Absolutely. So I live in Blythe with my wife and my two daughters, 10 and 8. And I recently began a new venture in my line of work, which is in relationships and sex education, of which I've been a practitioner for a number of years. And I'm very passionate about creating spaces where young people, particularly young men and boys, can learn a bit more about themselves and learn to be empowered and equipped to make those healthy choices throughout their teenage years and beyond around relationships, sex, well-being, what they're consuming online, and how their physical, emotional and mental health impacts all of that.
That's a strong message, and I think we can relate. We've got
That's
young kids, young boys, and the world that we're living in at the moment, this digital era. I mean, I wouldn't like to be a young person right now, and trying to navigate that as a parent and think, where are your kids going to go and what's it going to look like in 10 years' time? It is a pretty scary place, and I think educating young men on these things and the rights and wrongs, I think it's a really noble effort. It's needed.
In the year 2024, when the digital kind of culture is, I mean, all of us, we're in the eye of the storm, aren't we?
Absolutely.
It is, and for our children, I think I've got three kids, similar age to yours, Ben. Ray, you've got 2 boys,
Yeah,
bit younger.
yeah.
For me as a parent, the scariest thing is absolutely just trying to navigate them through how to develop their actual human ability to communicate and to have perception and understanding in the physical real world. I think that is the most tricky thing right now, when there's a screen and a device and a kind of homogenization of your attention fleetingly onto the next thing. It's so scary.
It is. And I think even if whatever our young people or children are consuming online, even if that is relatively harmless, we could maybe talk about what might not be so harmless as other things, but I'm not sure that we're wired or conditioned to process that much information, whether that's TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. And a lot of it can help us. And I think we need to learn how to keep up with how we can progress as humans through this sort of innovative world that we're living in technological world. But I think often it's just a case of too much and information overload. And we need to remember what makes us human, which is being relational, and which is getting outside and all that kind of stuff.
That's such a strong message, isn't it? Because we've got a thing in our pocket that gives you all the information in the world instantly. And, that's why the popularity of mobile phones and devices has just skyrocketed. But like you say, are we built to consume this much information? Everything's just there. Mm-hmm. Seconds later, this AI technology terrifies me. It absolutely terrifies us. I've got no doubt it's got a place in the world, and it can if you harness it in the right way. But that's the problem, isn't it? It's not being used in the right way, and the restrictions, and it's so hard, like Sam's saying, to stop your kids from being exposed to that when it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. All the mates are doing it. The advertising and stuff, no one's regulating it properly, are they? I think the content.
No, it's tricky. And when my daughter started middle school, as she did recently, there was quite a lot of pressure on her to just have the most up-to-date iPhone.
Wow.
That was probably the biggest issue that she had to deal with in terms of her mental health and starting middle school.
Are we talking about a £2,000 bit of kit or something here?
So
I don't have an iPhone, admittedly.
Yeah, in our particular case, we're talking about the latest one that broke, or whose battery sort of started to fail. That was in my middle drawer of junk in my bedroom.
So it's not even to have an iPhone; it's to have the latest iPhone.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But I dare say it's because if they're on these apps like TikTok and whatnot, those apps only develop with the latest phones, and you'll not be able to get this feature or this filter or that. And it's God. But that's the most important thing in the world to children, isn't it? Fitting in, and and at the expense of your parents often. Yeah. But I don't think people realize that that it's not just a case of them having a phone that they can play games on and watch a bit of YouTube. It's been every year when there's an update comes out, being up to date with all this new tech.
Yeah. And if you look at all of the data, ironically, the data we've now sort of gathered in terms of mental well-being, totally, I think with young girls especially, it totally is in sync with iPhones becoming sort of everybody's got one at a young age, and then you're seeing all of the rise in anxiety, depression, self-harm, that pressure, like you say, with the boys. It's, this is a fucking deep conversation for me. I mean, I stressed it to you there, Ben, at the start, for me as a parent, just yesterday we were driving down, I was just saying to you around the way here to the studio today, I was driving down to Whitley Bay yesterday with my wife, the 3 kids in the van. And we've recently moved to Blythe, actually, where you are. And my little girl, just 6.5, sometimes she does a FaceTime to a couple of her friends back. So, like, the idea is I always try and promote, healthy use of these screens, because I am not a Luddite in terms of this technology, right? It's like, it's amazing, but we have to navigate it with Yesterday, I think we'd received a text. So my little daughter's friend must have sent a text on her mum's phone to my wife's phone for my daughter. Now, my wife set her up to send a text back, and I was driving, looking at Whitley Bay. Oh, this is beautiful. And I looked round, I said to her, and I'm, this would probably be my wife and I's most tricky conversations we ever have, and she's on it with me, but I am literally I was like, whoa, and I'm trying to do it in a way where I don't cause a scene, but I'm like, look, why don't we wait till we get and let her ring her, because even this action now, this harmless, like, she's just we're just texting back, and she's spelling, and I'm like, yeah, but she's 6, and if we get used to sending text messages, and a text message, bing, oh, it's for me, and I'm going to send a text, and I'm going to put, like, that way of communicating becomes normal, go-to even, and then we haven't developed yet the actual physical real world understanding of how to communicate. That frightens me to death.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I think, again, this is a much bigger conversation, isn't it? But I feel as though we just need to be putting more time aside in school. That's where the majority of our kids are spending their days, just to talk about how to have relationships effectively, and how to talk, how to be tolerant, how to be respectful, how to respectfully agree to disagree with someone. I feel like in a world of Twitter, whatever it happens to be called this week, we've lost that ability to be able to respectfully disagree. And right, if they're not on my wavelength, if their values differ from mine slightly, I'm not going to accept that. I'm just going to start a keyboard warrior war with this person.
Yeah.
That's why I came off Twitter at the start of December for a month initially, but I've just not gone back on there because my well-being is far better without being on there.
Isn't that an amazing epiphany, when you realise, because like, I've met you for the first time today, Ben, you've just come in the studio, we've just met, okay? Now, if we had happened to have come across one another today in a feed, someone posted something about your particular job, or you posted, and we're having a conversation in that feed, and I'm passionate and you're passionate, and I put my 10-bit in, and I spend a minute, and while I'm doing this, I'm not talking to my kids. Hang on a minute, I'm writing this message. I'm really passionate about this. This guy's, then someone else comes in. Oh, no. for instance, I homeschool. You know, homeschool, you socialise, you know, and I'm into this thing, right, in this feed when I'm at Whitley Bay, supposed to be at the beach with my kids. But I feel passionately about this and I'm changing the world. No, I'm not. I'm not here. I'm not in the world. I'm talking to a stranger. I'm judging a stranger. Look what this person said. Look what Upside Down 69's just said about homeschooling, you know. And it's like the whole thing. I can remember having those feelings.
I'm stealing that Twitter.
When I wanted to come off, I can remember thinking how, what's the right word? Just pointless. Me telling someone or getting into something with someone that I can't even see, and then me carrying that around with me, and then not only not doing that, but then realising when I'm back, and as you allude to a little bit there, for a month that becomes everything, you realise, oh, I'm back here. Like, it's just speaking to people.
And you take into account how we communicate with each other in the real world. So much of it is body language and tone of voice, as opposed to the actual words we use. You don't have that luxury online, so things are often taken the wrong way. I often had a fallout with a friend of mine. Can't remember the exact circumstances, but it was simply just something taken the wrong way. And that was when we were both adults.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. So to think the amount of times that young people must face that and then have to deal with the potential trauma of that, of falling out with a friend, and how that is their everything, belonging to a group, being part of that group, being respected in that group and having that status.
Before they've actually had enough experience in life to realise that isn't the predisposition for communication. That is not the because that's what's happening to young people, isn't it? That text that I saw my wife with my daughter do yesterday, which is harmless, but if it was a fleeting moment and another fleeting moment, and that becomes how I sit by the time she's 10, that go-to sort of instant, easy communication is normal.
And she's not answering the phone to you when you ring.
Oh, they can't look at you.
Kids don't answer phones. I seen a survey by some college in the Midlands, and they were saying that when they were getting the new students through on the first year, they'd done a survey, and something like a crazy number, like 70% had never actually physically answered the phone on the mobile.
Wow.
They just did everything through, I mean, probably at a stretch, a voice note. You know, that's probably like, but it was all just text, and they're having to put on these classes to teach people how to have a conversation on a telephone, because they just haven't ever done it. And that to me is bonkers, isn't it? A device that is a telephone made to connect people through conversation is used for everything else but that. And I mean, you through the work you're doing, Ben, with educating, you are obviously going to school and you're speaking to a lot of people and you're engaging with a lot of young people. What are the main topics that you're finding are, you know, big issues for young people at the moment?
So I think how to have a positive, healthy, fulfilling relationship, and all of the different webs that come off there, is probably where it starts, particularly around romantic relationships amongst teenagers and how they navigate those. So consent is a massive issue, and feeds into a lot of that. And again, exactly what we're talking about, just how to effectively communicate with a partner, how to find out how they're doing, how they are, what their boundaries are, if it's getting a bit more intimate at certain levels of age or relationship within that sort of secondary school demographic, if you like. And again, because they're so influenced by what they're seeing online or from pressure from their mates or what they're hearing in song lyrics, there's a lot of contributing factors to where they're getting their ideas and expectations from. They are struggling to understand the importance of actually the only thing that matters in that moment is having a conversation with that other person.
So does your passion for educating these people, especially young men, is that driven from you having two young daughters and probably
Absolutely.
In your view for the future for them and their relationships? Is that what drives you?
So that drives me massively. So a lot of what I do, I spent a few days last week in a few schools in Cumbria talking about how we conduct ourselves and sexual harassment to get to the point of it, and just how we would define that. And it's in terms of how we are treating other people in corridors, in our communities. When I say our, I'm speaking from the perspective of the young people that I speak with in a school setting and beyond, and how they speak with each other, how they often will share inappropriate images, which is probably something that neither of you are surprised to hear has become this very common thing, and body parts have become less intimate, less protected than perhaps the once were. Young people are very desensitized to what we probably would have seen as graphic and very personal, very private images. And going back to why I see myself and doing this and why I continue to do it is whatever survey or bit of research that you look at, it's very unlikely that my daughters will get to the age of, say, 18 having not been a victim of some sort of sexual harassment.
Wow.
So it's, on the one hand, it's difficult to change a culture in an hour that I might have with a young person and I might never see them again. I try to be very clear with schools whilst taking into account the feasibility of their timetables and the like, that it's more impactful for them as a school and for their young people who might access a workshop that I might run, that maybe seeing me 3, 4, 5, 6 times and looking at, for example, healthy masculinity is going to be the thing that's going to make a dent in that culture, in those expectations, because a lot of these lads have not been, maybe they've not had the right role models around them. And so they don't know any better. I don't want to make excuses for this behavior, which isn't acceptable, but I think that they also need to be in an environment where they are respected and they can have their voice heard. And then we need to get down to conversations around empathy and around compassion, and how you go about living out those characteristics in your everyday life, and how that's not only going to benefit the people that you are interacting with, i.e. your romantic partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever, but it actually benefits your own happiness and your own fulfillment in the long run. If you understand how to make another person happy and how to be generous with yourself, that's better for the well-being of you and the people that you're spending your time with.
Wow.
More power to that, yeah, absolutely.
I think, like, obviously you're talking about healthy masculinity. Obviously the flip side of that is toxic masculinity, isn't it? And I think...
Which has almost become like a buzzword now,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, and it's hard to really understand what it is, what contributes to that. And I dare say we had a conversation on the way here about, what we used to be like when we were younger and being caught up in that big lad culture.
Yeah.
And, you think back and you think, crikey, I wouldn't want my sons acting like that. But I don't know if it was sort of symptomatic of where we're from or a sign of the times, but a lot of it is sort of celebrated, isn't it? Where, hey lads. And it's, I think my question for you is, with the toxic masculinity and the traits that you're seeing in kids, what are the main factors for that?
I think there's pressure to be somebody. I think there's pressure to maybe have a certain label of being someone in a group of friends, and that's
like a status thing.
And that sense of belonging. There's quite a lot of research which says that young people and lads in particular, they just want to be respected in that group. I think that's why there's a lot of there's a big gang culture thing going on. Yeah. I think they would sacrifice maybe their studies, the respect amongst people older than them, their families, their parents, their teachers, if it meant anything that didn't mean losing face amongst their peer groups. I think that's a big thing. And just to try to encourage them that they are individual, and that their choices matter, and that they are going to be sought out by what is not always, but often opposite members of the opposite sex who they are trying to impress for being individual, not for being part of a crowd, and that's what's going to single them out long term.
That's a really interesting point. And thinking back to being that age, just like you said there, everything I would forgo everything just to fit in with the lads and
get
be
a
one of
raise
them.
off the boys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like nothing else was higher on my list of priorities than being one of the lads. And yeah, you do. That is the most important thing to you when you're young. And that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you leave school and you realise that I dare say 90% of the people you thought were so important or they were the coolest kids in the world, you'd lose touch with them and never to be seen again. And you look back on school and what all your problems from that time, what seemed like the only problems in the world, you're just like, whoa, none of them matter.
That's interesting. That because isn't it funny how in the currency for, certainly in my experience growing up in the East Midlands and hearing you talk, Ray, up here in the Northeast, the currency for me at school was like, who was the hardest? Who was the maddest?
Best footballer.
Who was the best footballer? Who was the best fighter? All that. It wasn't who was the most intelligent. Who was the kindest? Who was the kind of the soundest, sort of more thought. What a strange. How's that?
Well, often if you did show those, qualities of having empathy and being like kind natured,
weakness.
Well, it was like, let's pick on him, let's get him. That you hope that doesn't happen in your adult life, but that is school life.
What do you put that down to, Ben? What do you think that culture is, and do you see that all around the country? When you go around the country, is it the same everywhere? Is it kind of rooted in the family? I know that a lot of modern families now are what we call blended, and the actual nuclear fundamental family isn't what it used to be. You could say that.
It's a good question. I think there's probably a number of factors which put this pressure on lads to act a certain way. I think there's a certain number of influences out there as well. I think we need to understand where lads spend their time, and we need to not necessarily consume the same content or the same amount of content, but have an understand of what it is that they get out of these people that we might just say, well, that person's a terrible role model, forget them. That's not going to fly with a young person, with a young lad. They're going to need more than that for us to effectively challenge their perception of that person as being someone positive in their lives. And I'm talking about people who maybe are very, very clever and quite manipulative at seeking out what on the whole is maybe vulnerable lads who maybe think that thriving for success and popularity and women is going to give them the happiness that they crave. And I think what we need to do is get them in a room and ask them themselves, where are these influences coming from, and why do you think following these guys is going to make you happy? And we need to maybe look at some examples of some people who followed the examples of these influencers and say, where has it got them?
So when you say influences there, I've just got Andrew Tate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to give him any airtime on it.
So I wanted to ask you, where do you stand with him? Because I have some of the things he says about ownership of yourself and responsibility, and there's some stuff in there.
Yeah.
And I've watched long form of him as well, because I won't, as I learned coming out of the social media world, we're clip people. We take a fucking sentence or a bit of hearsay and we go, that person's this. So I wanted to watch some long form stuff there. And I picked out some bones of like some stuff that was like absolutely right on, Jordan Peterson-esque, responsibility, ownership, hard work, but then a load of mad stuff about girls and women and cars, but I put that down to him being a bit of a younger guy, and I don't know, but that reach that he has, it's a real paradox at the moment, whether that is really, really damaging or is it helping in any way? Where do you stand with that?
I think it's I think it's difficult to comment on such a divisive character when it's perhaps
something's connecting, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Like I say, I think he's very clever in what he does, and he's very
Right.
manipulative.
Okay.
And I think I've had conversations in classrooms, and I've seen thousands and thousands of young people over the years. And
Is that his majority audience? Is it like kids
Young-
of
young-
that age?
young
Are they
men,
looking?
young
I
men,
don't know a whole.
young men and boys. I mean,
12 to 40, I guess.
So that's who he's having the biggest impression on, is it? Right.
and I think if they can see a tried and tested example of somebody who drives fast cars and is successful with women and is liked because of it, they're going to go after that. And I think it's difficult to. I think sometimes you need to ask yourself, looking at his character as a human being and the things he's come out with, do you think he's going to leave a positive mark on the world? I just think something I reference quite a lot is the longest ever study of adult development, which is called the Harvard study. Which
Yeah,
was
it's amazing.
at Harvard.
Boston.
I love that.
Isn't
So-
it this? They're like.
It's the longest study of adult
That's
development
it.
that's
I think
ever
we're in
been
like
carried
7
out.
generations of family
So it
to this day. It's still
started around about the end of World War II.
Uh-huh.
So we're talking the mid 1940s, and they took people from all walks of life, different classes, different job types. I think it started with men, but then throughout the decades, it evolved, and those men's families, which involved women and children,
Yeah.
took part in this study, and they caught up with these people every few years of their lives, monitored them, interviewed them, looked into their well-being, and measured it on a variety of sources.
Yeah.
And for those people who took part in the study who were lucky enough to live to be old age, there's pretty much a 100% success rate of that old question, which is ultimately why they did the study in the first place, of what makes a person happy. And it's just the relationships that you forged and the
That's
people
so
the
interesting,
people that
'cause
you spend your time with.
We all think
And-
about health, don't we, and all that. But actually,
And I think those things are valid.
of course,
Absolutely.
Well, but like all of this stuff, and as you rightly point to, Ben, it's an holistic. It's everything. It's the things that point us in a certain direction. There's so many different elements of culture, whether it's football and beer and girls, or pulling us in one direction. You know, like that was what was interesting for that study for me, was so being social and having meaningful connections. And this comes back to the start of our conversation when we talked about, you said about we're not supposed to be taking in all this information. That was something I used to think about. I used to sort of use a kind of flimsy analogy, but I used to say to my wife when I was sort of winding us down, saying, look, we need to get off. We don't want our kids on Instagram when they're 7 years old. I can't be scrolling through Instagram on the sofa telling him to, you know, because what am I doing?
We've got a role model, haven't we?
And it's like, we've got a hard drive, literally. And I learnt this. Are you aware of the Robin Dunbar's number, an anthropologist?
Yeah, a little, yeah.
So he was an anthropologist studying sort of early settlers and tribal communities and hunter-gatherers. And essentially the Dunbar's number is, I think it's between 100 and 150. Tribes and communities never got bigger than that, and when they got to those kinds of numbers, they would split off and reform into smaller groups, because seems to be what our emotional. We can hold that amount of kudos from meaningful emotional connections, and after that, it becomes just too much. And when you said at the beginning we're taking on too much information and it's too much going in, that's exactly what it feels like to me, and the meaning goes out of everything, doesn't it?
It does, and I think as well we need to accept that these are teenagers now, and the age of our 3 kids as well, the age of the kids of us 3 sat here, should I say, 7 kids in total. I think they've been given a pretty tough ride, actually, because I didn't particularly enjoy school. It was a bit too academic for me, to be honest, of where my interests are and where my passions are. And I loved English and drama, and I loved PE. I hated the rest.
Same as me. History, I liked history as well.
But if you look and break down the reasons as to why many teens maybe struggle with their mental health and well-being now, most of those contributing factors didn't exist when I was there in the late 90s, which are what we've talked about: social media and body image, a pandemic that we've just lived through.
Yeah, we haven't even touched that, have we? Jesus.
Global conflict, which is which is on a different scale to when we were lads.
All of which is being pumped 24/7 through that device into what I was saying there, that little hard drive in my prefrontal cortex, which can only hold so much information. It is just
overload,
fucking plugged in and being. I mean, try and watch something on Netflix now. What should we watch?
Something that's under 22 minutes from that manager.
Yeah. And fancy something fun. Come on, let's have a look. Oh, what about this? What about that? What about fuck it? Turn it off. My head's done in. But I mean,
that's why I love going to the cinema. I mean, I'm a big movie fan. I've always loved my films. We travelled around America in our younger days and went to visit loads of film locations around America, and just time of our lives, brilliant. But if I try to watch a film on Netflix now, there's no way I won't stop to check my phone or to go off and do something else. Which is one of the reasons why I love
muscle memory, isn't it? You just find yourself doing it.
I love going to the cinema now, and it's because I will not look at my phone for the entirety of that film.
Do you know what? It's little solutions like that, Ben, which in my family I've been picking up on and noticing, and it's like, I think that's what's happening, and as a culture, as a society. You said earlier about there's no regulation, Ray, on, and I think at some point there will be. I think it will come in at some point if we. And this is another question I want to get to with you, Ben, about how do you find the schools that you visit? How are they seeing this issue? Because I think as a society, probably at a government level, which I can't believe is coming out of my mouth, but somewhere we have to start looking at a phone for a child, no different to a bottle of whiskey, and car keys. Because the kinds of...
Because it's so powerful, isn't it?
It's so... And you don't see it.
Yeah.
Oh, he's doing a maths game. It's a little maths game, but it's not. It's a phone that's got mesmerising plasma screen that is drawing us in and giving us dopamine response all the time. And when you've got to look up and be here, your attention's gone. I mean, we know that for adults. I mean, the Social Dilemma showed us that. I'm
going to mention this next point with a bit of trepidation because I feel like we might be here for some time given the characters we've got in the room. But what do you think of the educational system? What do you think of the institution?
What a question.
Are they failing our young kids? In terms of policing, in terms of the structure, in terms of what they're educating these kids about? Is it real world stuff? Or are we missing a trick completely? And I say that because you're obviously homeschooling, and
I think it's very, very difficult to keep up at the moment, isn't it? I think that we just need to be building I just think every single person has a different take on life. Every person comes into school every morning with a different set of values and a different experience around the breakfast table that morning. Some of them won't even have had breakfast. They would have experienced all sorts at home.
But not only that, the different people, those three in the room, will have different learning styles.
Absolutely.
Completely different.
Absolutely. So you combine those two things, and I almost think you're set up to fail. And that's saying that as someone who is married to a teacher, and a lot of my best friends are teachers, and they're fantastic people. And you can't ask for any better than that.
But they're sort of governed by the school system, aren't they?
Yeah.
So they've went into that with the best intentions, wanting to make a change and wanting to, better kids' lives and give them a good education. But you can only do what that curriculum says.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I think, we're talking about kids going to school and wanting to fit in and being in, groups or gangs or whatever. Now, when I was at school, I think I quickly lost interest in the actual learning side because it was just one-dimensional. Everyone's got to do this. You've all got to hit the targets. And it just didn't suit my way of learning. And you've got a classroom with 30-odd kids. Some of my mates were never, ever, ever going to do anything other than go into a trade. My dad was in a trade. One of the lads, his dad was a farmer. He only ever wanted to go and work on a farm. Sound. Great. So why are we sitting ramming algebra down these kids' necks? Basically making them feel like the failures because they're in bottom set of this, bottom set of that, bottom set of this subject. They're never, ever, ever going to have to use in the real world. Yet we're sending people out of school. They haven't got a clue what interest rates are, clue what mortgages are, a clue how to manage their finances. And I think we're looking at all these problems that are coming around in a society, but we're sending these kids off for most of the day to this place, which is meant to be a learning experience. They've lost interest because it's not catering to every learning style. So things are going to start happening. There is going to be subcultures that happen within the school, or you're just going to lose the kids in essence. And I think if we fundamentally looked at it and we changed our approach to learning, cater to people with more sort of hands-on trade skills or financing sessions, I think kids would have a different opinion about going to school, like they are actually getting something from it, and it wouldn't just become being the most popular kid there and, you know, getting into whatever trouble you're getting into there and
getting a good Ofsted report.
Or you avoid the bullies and you've won that day. And that's,
yeah.
100% Ray. I couldn't have put what you've just said any better. I 100% agree. I was in a school recently, and this often is the case, being an external visitor speaker in a school, where you're warned about the inverted commas naughty kids. And
I'd have been one of them, like, I think, once upon a time.
so then you're the one that needed to be in that lesson, who I wanted to be in that lesson. So when that's taken out of your hands, and they're
that's
taken
your
out
target audience,
because they're going to be disruptive. So they're probably the ones.
So they take them. They don't let them in the talk because they're a naughty kid.
I'll ask them to stay in. Sometimes, I think I've only ever I've had to ask for assistance in sending a child out about twice in 12 years doing this, just because they were disrupting the other kids that were there. That was it. I would always make sure I'd have a chat with that kid afterwards to still offer them some encouragement. But this particular kid was just disruptive, asking a lot of questions, that he was maybe pushing the boundaries. When you're talking about sexual harassment and consent in relationships and that kind of thing, and keeping yourself safe, and some people will naturally push the boundaries, the confident lads, the disruptive lads, but often they will be the ones who have the most to offer that lesson productively, effectively. So they're the ones that I want in there, and they've got as much right as anyone else. And I was having a chat with somebody else that was a member of staff about this particular lad after the lesson, and just said, if someone just spent 3 or 4 hours with him every day, I think he had at least 2 support staff with him in that lesson, and they didn't know what to do with them. You could tell they were just fed up with them. Like, I'm just going to take you out. There was no connection. I'm not saying they've got an easy job supporting that lad, and this is just one example of the millions in this country. But he's an example of what you've just said. Of he's never going to go to school and find his true self and find the things that he's passionate about, because he's just labelled as a naughty boy with no hope. And that's what we need to change.
Isn't that a mad concept? How much of your life do you spend in that school? You know,
well, if you think about identity, so as you allude, my kids are homeschooled. Well, we unschool essentially, which is just child-led learning. Now, my 2 older boys started at school, went into preschool for a year, then did year 1. The older one did year 1 and went into year 2. And my other boy, who's 15 months younger, he did preschool and did year 1, some of year 1. Now, as COVID kicked in, we all have our different opinions about how much we were going to let that impact us and what have you. And my wife's position with it was, this isn't right, and what they're doing with children, and watching my children go into that school and having their heads zapped for a temperature and being isolated, and assembly being beamed in on a screen, more screens being introduced, so it was less circles being drawn in the, like a 3-meter diameter circle, and 3 kids can play in a circle at playtime. And my son come home and telling me, I don't like it. I don't like, I borrowed little Jimmy's rubber today and I got told off by the teacher. And I said, well, look, you don't have to be here. Everyone's got masks on. Everyone's not touched. Everyone's washing their hands in this mental, cheap Chinese fucking bleach every 2. It's like, what is going on? I said, look, you don't have to be here. And we're lucky enough, my wife and I, where, we work from home predominantly. And we were like, look, And I was actually doing a podcast at the time, and one of the people I got on the podcast was a guy who'd written a book called Unconditional Parenting, Alfie Kohn, he's a New York Times bestseller. And I'd read this book about how children learn, and unconditional parenting being sort of the praise and punishment kind of dichotomy. Anyway, I said, look, you don't have to go to school. When this all dies down, and we took him out. And during that time, while I was doing the podcast, I thought I'll seek out more of this, what is homeschooling? Because the whole homeschooling thing started to happen, didn't it? Where we're doing it through an iPad. And everybody I spoke to just said it was horrible trying to do it, horrible trying to keep up. The kids, so we ended up sort of just reading more and more about what is unschooling and how do children learn. And it was mind blowing. And so when the time came back, where COVID had died down, and my eldest, who is quite academic of all my three, he reads 50 pages every night. He wanted to go back. And I was by then a bit like, oh God, I don't want you to go back. I've spoken to all these wonderfully inspiring people, learned a lot about what's happening here. And actually, if I send you back there, I'm sending you to a whole institution and place at the moment that I'm not behind right now. And what I had learned, the ironic thing, what I'd learned is like the unconditional is like, well, if this is what he wants to do, I have to let him do it because it's what he wants to do, and he'll make his own mind up. Anyway, he went back for a minute, about 8 weeks. We'd just come back from holiday in Turkey. We were there for a couple of weeks, and while we were in Turkey, he'd had a haircut, he had a Mohican, he chose an earring he wanted and a ring.
Joined a punk band.
Right, yeah. Started a revolution. But he went back to school. It wasn't a full-on Mohican. It was just like a bit Sam Fender, shaved up the sides and messy. But he went back to school. Bear in mind, he'd gone back to a teacher that he'd left prior. He'd been gone for 18 months. And then he had a watch as well, like a quite a cool little watch he'd bought on holiday. All stuff he'd just bought on holiday. Anyway, first week it was, can you take the watch off, Sonny? Then it was the next week, it was like, oh, you have to take that earring out. And they had to put tape on it. And then eventually they asked him to take it out because they eased him back in because they knew obviously our story about taking them out. And then it was the haircut, And I just watched his identity be took away from him, just removed from him. And then the final thing was they were given a project to recreate their own version of their favourite book cover. And in my son's case, he was reading Stephen King's It at the time.
It's a good project, that. I like that.
Right, yeah, great project. So he starts drawing and recreating It, the cover, because that's the book he's reading. Bear in mind, it's like it's biblical size. And the teacher came and told him, this is, he can't do that. This is irresponsible. Whoever's let him read this book, it's irresponsible. And he can't do it. And it got pulled out of his book and he had to do something else. And he came home and told me that night, and he was gutted. And I don't want to knock school. I think it's something like 9 million children every year go through the school system, and it works because we go on and we become functional people. It does work. But what I feel like in the modern time, this like the homogenization, the culture, the stuff we're talking about, the phone zeitgeist of like this information, that information, pro this, anti that, that's hijacking the curriculum. It's like a virtue education now. And his identity was being removed. And his whole sense of himself was just like, and he said to me, we were at a Spartan race the night before, and me and him had a bit of a joke. I would give him a bit of a joke saying, well, you want me to take you back to the small people's prison? You really want to go back? And obviously, and I realised I shouldn't even joke with him about it, because having read that book, thank God I found that out of the comic book, is like, look, I'm creating a thing between me and him. But actually, he wants to do it. So I got behind him. And then he came to us that night before the spot. He's like, can I speak to you, Dad? I was like, yeah, what's up? He sat on the bed. He said, I don't think I want to go back to school again. I said, well, that's okay, darling. And then I started to feel the other way. I was thinking, oh, God, I hope he doesn't want to come out because he thinks we don't, And I had a big chat with him, my wife and I, on the bed. And he just proceeded to tell me all of that stuff. He said, no, I can't do this and I can't do that. And he said, do you know another thing I've noticed, Dad? Because he was 5.5 when he came out, and he was like 7.5 when he went back, 7. He said, I've noticed all my friends are like bullies now. They're mean. They're not like they used to be. Because he'd had this whole separation.
To period of time where he
Yeah,
wasn't
he
in.
had a different, because when he wanted to go back, I said to my wife, I said, I think he'll go back. I'm hoping, I'm praying because at the minute he's just got memories of being with his friends at school, and he's been at home and he's bored and he wants to go back. I said, I think when he gets back, he'll then have the memories of like not having to be on the clock and wear this and not do that and put your hand up for this. And that's what happened. He just said, look, I just don't like the feeling of it anymore, Dad, and I just want to do what we're doing. And I was like, well, that's cool if that's what you want to do. And but for us, we're lucky. It's just something that suits our lifestyle, because everyone can't just take the kids out of school. It's not, appropriate, is it?
But that's quite an interesting thing, like you say, because I like to think that I'm not that old, that I've got a good idea of how school is and what happens at school and the experience that my kids are having. Truth is, a lot has happened since I left school. The world's a totally different place. Yeah. And I found this out when I went to do a talk for a college. And so we delivered this talk, and a lot of the kids were coming up with some big problems, like stuff I didn't expect to hear that day. And then I spoke to some of the tutors, and they were talking about this county line stuff and drugs and all that. And do you know when your head nearly falls off because you're just like, I didn't even consider that. Mm-hmm. And I don't actually think I know what the issues that young people are dealing with anymore. I think my perception of
the world has moved on beyond in terms of exponential change. It's like we have hit the bell curve, haven't we? The technology, I think, as you said, Ben, at the beginning, we cannot take on all this information. You think of that Dunbar's number. Not only is that a small number of people, but it's it's in front of each other with the body language and all of we bring out the best in one another when we're in front of one another. We out of dignity and pride and honor and manners. As soon as you get that's not there, and it's a keyboard and it's a screen and it's 24/7 inundated, insane, and so much of it is false. This is filtered and it's pedicured and manicured and set up in a certain way, and so much of that stuff that's coming in that's abundantly just endless is not even truthful and authentic and real, and it's flooding us.
Yeah,
it's fucking a different world for
you
kids,
must come up with, when you're doing these talks in schools, I dare say some of the stuff you hear and the issues that these young people are having, I probably couldn't even begin to imagine some of the issues that they face, and you're obviously more privy to it than us.
Yeah, I think the most startling thing is when I try and frame the lesson or give it some context as to why we need to be talking about it. They're not particularly surprised by the statistics that I use to frame the session or the workshop. So 98% of sexual offences are committed by men.
98%?
98%. Obviously not 98% of men, but 98% of sexual offences that are committed. I always like to clarify that one, whether in a classroom or a podcast setting. And not saying these two statistics are by any means directly linked, but 96% of the prison population are male. So people are, for whatever reason, and it's important to try and look at the reasons, thinking it's okay to treat other people like that, but it's not getting them to places of fulfillment, which I think is interesting. So we need to be asking, what is it? Why are you making those choices? What are you hoping to achieve from them? Let's talk about what you want to achieve and how we'll get there, whilst you being the best version of yourself you can be.
So obviously those stats, I'd never heard those stats before. So that is why you're so passionate about teaching young men and engaging with young men, because of that very statistic that you're looking at there. The numbers don't lie. That's where the work needs to be done. Do you see regionally, any sort of nuances or anything different with the Northeast in particular? Do you see any?
I think the honest answer is I've probably not done enough work nationally to see the difference or the any correlation that might be there. There's a lot of big talk at the moment around another massive issue we've not really touched on, which is coercive control, and a lot of people would see that. So emotionally abusive relationships,
right?
Potentially imagine that and think if you were to have a guess, that would certainly impact people who, I don't know, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, people who've maybe got used to, maybe they've got used to there being an unequal power dynamic there in a relationship, for etc. But in research done recently, it's relationships from people who are aged 13 to 17 where coercive control is the most prominent. So we're not even talking about necessarily physical or sexual violence, where pornography plays a big part as well in forming young people's expectations and ideas.
My God.
But how that's another thing that you mentioned, that if you've got a smartphone at the age of 8, I dare say they're going to have all sorts of restrictions and that, but kids just find a way, don't they?
They do find a way.
And I think, like, right, I don't know if we were naive or just stuff wasn't out there when we were younger, but I remember being at school and somebody might have found like a magazine, or
in the
do you remember
woods.
or like Zoo or Nuts magazine? Remember when they came up?
FHM, whatever it was.
Yeah, remember that? Yeah,
and maybe Channel 5 would show a softcore movie at 9 o'clock.
Yes,
back in the late 90s when fuzzy Channel 5 launched.
Yeah,
and we're laughing.
And there was a movie on every night at 9 o'clock. Imagine living in a world where you can watch a movie every night at the same time, and look at how that's changed today. But I remember playing for my university football team out at university in Kent, and when we played away matches, we'd usually play colleges and unis on the outskirts of South London, so it was quite a big deal. You'd put a suit on, you'd get on the minibus, and on every away game, 2 lads would have their name picked out of a hat, and you'd have to go into a service station, pick a porn mag off the top shelf.
Yeah.
What would the equivalent of that be now?
Oh my God.
I can't even imagine. Download this clip and send it to everybody you know. I don't know what that clip would be.
Well, that's an interesting point as well, Ben, because you might have done a job with your kids where your kids have got a really kind of healthy relationship with their device, but they're in a WhatsApp group. Ping. There's something you never get out of your head that you've just had to look at that's gone into your fucking phone roll. And
I remember that was, do you know when those videos started coming around and there was like beheading videos.
Halfway through Postman Pat.
Yeah,
Kids
do
watching
you
Postman
remember that?
Pat. Yeah.
So you just get sent this video and you look and it's so innocent, and then there's all of a sudden there's somebody, and for me that just
How can you?
it affected us massively, and that's it's a tricky one. But I think a question that we're posing to everyone that's coming on to the podcast and sort of getting back to the Northeast as a region, and it ties in with what you're saying about statistics and young men, but we have got some of the highest suicide rates in the UK statistically, and mental health statistics in the Northeast are shocking, and men's mental health and men's suicide is incredibly high in this region. So that was sort of why I asked that question before, to see if you see anything in young males that are, from the Northeast, that you could sort of pinpoint that's a little bit different. But why do you think, given I think we live in a fantastic area with fantastic people and great resources and whatnot, why is it that we are struggling so much as a region?
That's a really good question. I mean, I know I worked in some schools in certain areas, maybe which are a little bit more deprived in the Northeast, and I remember having conversations with people who went to the Metro Centre in half term or in summer holidays, and that was their like their big event, their big trip.
Wow.
So might it be that in terms of aspirations, they're just not there, they don't understand there's a big wide world out there. And I think often I have to say that London and the South forget that we exist. So I think that when you'll sometimes see things on the news that happen in London, and it'll be a big, like floods, for example, or it might be a new statistic around mental health, to bring it back to what we're talking about, and we'll be living that every day, but that's not on the national news. Yeah, because it's not London.
The forgotten lands. Do you think?
Forgotten lands a little bit. Yeah, I think the Northeast will always struggle to get rid of that label. And I just think maybe more generally, I know that there's lots to be said about how men struggle with their close friendships when they get to 40s, 50s, middle age, and how we don't know how to have close friendships. I've read a lot recently about how men don't have people that they can talk to about their mental health or about money. at our sort of age, late 30s, early 40s. And I think when there's so much around status and what can you offer this friendship group that's going to be appealing to everybody, going back to teenage years, are we sometimes forgetting in a way that we maybe didn't 20, 30 years ago when social media wasn't such a huge thing? And now kids will spend more time on there than they will at school.
Yeah.
So what did we used to do with that other 5 or 6 hours? I think we played out together. We had friendships. We talked to each other more.
Yep.
And now that intimacy and friendships has been sucked up.
Nailed it.
It's such an interesting point, right? Because going back to that lad culture, years ago, in my mates, it all revolved around going out, getting lashed up, da-di-da-di-da. And that was like the sort of level of, that's as deep as the friendship got. And in some respects, I was fine with that, and I've noticed that the older I've got, that I need a deeper connection with. So I don't need as many friends, but I need more authentic connection with friends, where I pick up the phone and you say, "Are you all right, mate?" And you get an honest answer. And if you're not, you're there. You're there. It's not just like, "Oh, man, let's go for a pint, pull yourself together." That goes out the window. So for me, and that's a massive part of me dealing with life, any issues I've got, because we all have problems in life, don't we? And dealing with my mental health is having that connection, a deeper connection with my mates, where it's real and authentic.
Yeah.
And that is a massive thing for me, and the age that I'm at now. So if you got to that age, 40, 50s, and you hadn't been able to get that connection, and you were still maybe, you had a friendship group, but it was just all around that bullshit bravado, let's go for a beer, and there was no substance to it. You just talked about football and scrapping, and
Well, that's what you're saying, Ben, in that Harvard study, isn't it? Is that those social, meaningful, connected relationships in your elder age is what gives us vitality and a sense of, I don't know if it's happiness, but it's certainly a sense of meaning and purpose and connection and community, isn't it? And I think you nailed it there. Where when we all sit here and chat, and we go, when we were young, we'd just be out playing, and you'd be chatting with your mates, and you'd be on the farmer's field, or you'd be on the beach, or like we spoke with Sandy, didn't we, in an episode? He said, summer holidays was dropped off at the beach.
all your mates were there.
Everybody was there around the calf, and you just were playing, and you were just out. And today, we have got all this connection, all of this processed connection, if you like, to use like the fast food, like not the real food, not the whole food. The whole food being playing out with your mates, talking face to face, having real connections and bonds, to now WhatsApp groups and gaming online with you, in your own room, and he's in his own room, and you think you're together, but you're not together. That seems to be degrading, like whatever. Because as we're children, we're also, our systems, our hormonal systems, our nervous system, everything is uploading as we are growing up. And if they don't upload with the right, if they get glitches, if we don't get that exposure to those things that we need, like the real world, we don't learn it, and your system uploads and it didn't upload with the right information, and then you don't have that information to go forward with. And I think that's where we are, is these things, these little black mirrors are. There's a song that came out, I played it to you a lot, Ray, and for the listeners, it won the Ivor Novello in I think 2020, Future Utopia, with the rapper Dave. Are you aware of it?
I'm not sure I am, to be honest.
Children of the Internet. Children of the Internet, it's called. And I forget the lady at the start, they sample a lady at the start and at the end, and she's just talking. And in the beginning, she talks about, when I perform these days, when I'm at the shows, and I look out and I just see a sea of telephones. And she said, and I sometimes think to myself, it's almost as if the human's job was to just bring the telephones to the show. And in the end of the song, she comes back in and she gives some statistics, and she talks about, there's the average human taps, swipes, pinches their phone 1 million times a year. There's more active cell phones on the planet than people. And she talks about, I'm torn with this because technology and evolution is amazing. She said, like, we found the flint, we developed the flint, and the flint developed us. And that's what's happened with the smartphone. And she said, you know, it's a connection device, but it's a disconnection device. And it's placed between the human and his surroundings, tuning the surroundings out. And I listened to that, I'm like,
it's powerful. It's
wow.
powerful stuff.
And the song is, let's check that out, listeners. If you know, Children of the Internet, Future Utopia and Dave, it is phenomenal. And for the kids, what a vehicle for the kids, because I played it to my kids. And for us older ones as well, it's got a real old school kind of swing hip hop beat, you know, it's got that about it, really lovely piano loop, but the lyrics are really concise and simple. You know, you meet 100 people without leaving your house. You know, like the park's empty, it's turned all trendy, you know.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Check that out.
I think the power of music's probably something we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
My 8-year-old's already obsessed with all sorts of popular music, whether it's Taylor Swift or slightly less known artists, and she listens to the lyrics and she takes it in. And I think it massively influences young people and introduces them to other artists and musicians who write similar stuff, and introduces them to communities online. And I think we need to be aware of that, talking about impacts on young people. I think music
I had exactly
it's
that.
huge, actually.
Yeah, my niece, we get in the car and me and my kids, she comes stay with us for a weekend, we're all listening to music. Pick a song, you pick a song, you pick a song. My kids, we used the Beatles. Before the podcast started, Ben, I was telling you about one of the kind of learning curves we went on, which was MJ. The other one was the Beatles, right? When they're a bit younger. My son would ask me, Dad, what does that mean? What is, you know, this song, that song, and those lyrics? When I revisited the Beatles again, because I loved them as a kid, and well, they're my favourite band ever, but I revisited and went deep with my kids. And we did exactly that, learning what I knew from how to unschool, how to use their curiosity as a learning device and circle it back to principles. The Beatles lyrics, fucking love, peace, unity, together. Like, be good, be kind, be together, you know, that everything. And when my niece, bless her, she chose a tune, she put this tune on that was like, I don't know if it was Rihanna or something, but it was like, I listened to the lyrics and the messaging and I was like, fucking hell, what, 7-year-old lass listening to this about bling and how your booty is your fucking magic and you can control this and control that and I want this and I want that and I deserve this and I was like, that messaging. And my wife sometimes, God, you're too deep about it. I'm like, yeah, but this is subliminal. Like, what is happening here is subliminal. If you're 7 and you're hearing that all day, that's programming what it is that you're going to go out and look for.
It's a pretty big point.
Oh, it's programming, man. It's the culture, our culture at the moment. And again, what Ben said earlier, too much info. And it's such a moving target. Like the zeitgeist is just like the virtue now is we're logging onto virtue and everyone's going to change the profile picture to whatever the hashtag I'm a great guy thing is, meaninglessly. Do you know what I mean? Just because it looks good. And we're programming that into kids and the meaning and the authenticity and actually thinking your own thoughts even. Like how many kids now are actually thinking their own thoughts? You know, like you said about being individual, it's fucking...
Do you know what it is? I've got a feeling we could go on all day on this pod, but we are gonna have to wrap it up. I think one thing to leave on, what would be your number one advice to anyone that was listening that might be struggling with their mental health or something that has served you well with your mental health and well-being over the years?
I think it's just something that you will not be hearing for the first time, which is just the weight off your shoulders when you talk about how you're feeling to somebody else.
Yeah.
And they will be more than happy that you have shared that, even if it's tough. There's nothing better than when I go out for a run with my brother and we just open up about how we're doing.
Shoot the breeze and share.
Sharing's
caring, isn't it?
And it just makes us feel loved and valued. And what's more important in life than those things?
Oh,
on
beautiful,
that note,
beautiful.
what a strong point.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for your time today.
Ben, thank you so much. Just quickly, how can everyone find you, find out about the work you're doing? If they want to work with you, how could they book you in?
I'm just at Worth Educating on Instagram. If you're Worth educating.org. Find out more about the workshops I deliver and the I guess the bespoke service I offer. Just happy to get in and amongst young people to try and build them up and empower them and to live the best lives and to treat themselves and other people well.
Do you know what, Ben? Yeah, isn't it? Because
What a positive message.
There's probably no more important job that we can do now as adults, and no more rewarding thing than to inspire young people into healthy futures. What more? That's more power to you, man. Yeah, we'll link that in, and people check that out.
Put all the links to your page and whatnot. But Ben, thanks again. Been a great chat.
Thank you. Love what you guys are doing. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
man. It means a lot.
Brilliant. Take care.
Awesome.